So this upcoming week is another big week of earnings, and I just wanted to come on here and overview three stocks that I closely follow and I made videos on that I think are great buys coming into this upcoming week. And I'm just going to do a quick overview of each stock and just why I really believe these especially could take off, some a little bit more than others. So the first one I wanted to overview was Uber. They announced earnings on Wednesday, and if you don't know what Uber does, it's probably the most well-known of these three. They're a ride-sharing company. They're getting more into the autonomous vehicle market with AI becoming more of a play for these ride-sharing companies with the self-driving cars. And Uber, in terms of the stock price, since I made my first video on it around when it was kind of around here, it has had, it's up and downs. It's kind of climbed to this 90 level and then had a little bit of a pullback, and then climbed all the way up almost to the 100 level. And now we are currently in the middle of another pullback. So this is a very healthy chart. It is just, they're just continuing, the stock is continuing to pull back, but it's at higher levels than before. We had a pullback down to almost 80 here, and now we're kind of hovering around the 85 level, 87 level going into earnings on Wednesday. And personally, I think after earnings, we could reach 100 and break 100 and head to, the 115, 120 levels by the end of the year. And in terms of the revenues, continued upward trend of revenues, which is what you love to see. Just honestly continuing to do that. If they continue to show that in their earnings, that would be great. And then the big thing with Uber is the profitability, which I talked about in my multiple videos on Uber in the past, is how they're just starting to become profitable, which if you look back at the stock price is kind of why they just, were not really moving for these couple of years. And all of a sudden you're, reaching the 100 levels. So that's the big thing to look for, is the profitability. I think they set themselves up for really in a great spot to move up after the earnings. They had this pullback from near 100 levels just really because of the Tesla news that they were going to be in the autonomous vehicle market. But again, that isn't really going to affect their revenues at all or net income. So I think this pullback offers great opportunity for you to invest and just kind of ride it up to 100. This is definitely the lowest risk out of the three. I think there isn't really a world where we see a huge drop from Uber, but there's always a chance. So, you got to just kind of do your own research and see with earnings, anything could happen. There could be a bad quarter for whatever reason, and then this could drop to maybe 75 or 80 and not really move. That's kind of what it did last time. It didn't really move up immediately, and then we kind of saw a eventual gain from Uber. And the second stock I want to talk about is Kingstone. I've only made one video on the stock, and then I also talked about them last earnings. But Kingstone is an insurance company. It's a very small company compared to Uber. It's only 215 million in market cap. It's not even a billion yet. But I think it's a very undervalued company. I'm not personally invested in it just because I don't have the money to do so. I think that, there might be other companies that I like a little bit more than Kingstone, but I really do think in the short term, at least going into these earnings, we could see a huge jump here from Kingstone, just because for Kingstone, it's a very small stock. There hasn't really been any news about them since last earnings, which you can see this huge spike here. That would be last earnings. From May 8th to May 9th, it jumped from 18 to 21, nearly 22. And then after that, there was a huge sell-off because investors were taking profits, which is not surprising considering how small of a stock this is. And it's so easy to have price movement if a lot of investors are selling. And since then, we've kind of just been a little stable. It was a little down and then kind of settled on this 15 level, and we've kind of just been sitting there ever since. We've kind of jumped a little bit from the lows here of around $14 to we hit $16 until we just went down 15.50. So again, it's a good chart to jump back up. And I think if they continue to beat earnings like they have in the last couple of quarters, you could see this thing jump back up to 20, which would be great gains. And then you could honestly think about selling almost immediately after earnings, because there is, again, the risk of a sell-off. So I think after their earnings, I think they announce on Thursday after market closes, I think that you could think about selling if you see that the 50% gain or whatever it's going to be, or 40% gain. And these are the revenues, just the continued upward trend. That's what you love to see. And then once again, the profitability is another thing with Kingstone, where you look back at their chart, they had a huge, not here, but a huge dip here because they weren't profitable. And then we just recently saw this huge jump in the last year or so. So if they can continue the profitability, which, you know, you've been seeing these last couple quarters kind of slowed down a little bit, but if you can maybe see them pick that up a little bit, I think this thing could easily go back up to 20 or higher, which is what it was at after last earnings before the sell-off, and they never really had a catalyst to bring that thing up. So those are my first two. And then my last one is probably my favorite stock right now in the market. One of them is Vistra. And I've been tracking this since around 130. You know, they had a huge pullback because of the tariffs. And obviously, it's impossible to know when the bottom is. But I got in relatively early compared to where it is now. We're almost at 210, which is crazy to think. And, you know, profits have been great. Hopefully some of you guys have been able to get in on it. But I also like this for earnings. I think it's the riskiest out of the two for earnings just because of how much it's climbed. You know, this chart hasn't really had a pullback. We've had a couple minor pullbacks to, you know, from 200 to 190, but we've been just continuously climbing. And, you know, I don't know if it's ever, you know, where it stops because there's going to be a pullback sometime soon. It's just not going to keep going up like this. I don't know if maybe earnings is the place to do so, but I'm continuing to hold this. If it goes down maybe to 200 after earnings, it's no big deal. Once again, the same story with Vistra. These are their revenues just continuing to grow steadily over the last couple of quarters, and then their net incomes. Once again, the profitability. They were profitable one quarter here, and then barely profitable, and then not profitable. So if you can just see them be profitable this quarter, which hopefully that happens, you could see the jump up to 220, 230. 250. You know, it's honestly no one knows where this is going to go, but it's not crazy overvalued, only a 33 PE ratio, which is a little high for an energy stock. But the idea that it's tied to AI so heavily because they got to supply the data centers with the energy makes it really low. You know, Nvidia's at 55 PE, so it's not that bad. They also recently upped their dividend yield, which, you know, investor confidence probably at an all-time high right now. So this is definitely another one to look out for. But I'm saying if you only have two stock, if you only want to invest in two out of the three of these, I would definitely choose Uber and Kingstone as, you know, the favorites to beat earnings because Vistra's expectations right now are going to be at an all-time high with how much it's grown in the last couple months. So those are my three picks. Next week, I'm probably going to come on here and just do a quick overview of how the earnings went. Hopefully all three beat, but, you know, it's kind of, you know, never know what happens with earnings. And then I'm going to overview a couple more stocks that I think are great buys for the next week because these next couple weeks are going to be big for earnings, and that's ultimately what is going to really be the main fuel for a company's stock gains. So let me know what you think in the comments. If you're liking the videos, please subscribe, and yeah, I'll see you next week.